I knew the weekend was going to be trouble the moment I saw the white Lexus pull halfway into my front yard. I was standing on my porch, coffee in hand, watching as the tires crushed the edge of my freshly mowed grass. Then came the second car. This one, a silver SUV with streamers taped to the mirrors, pulled all the way onto the lawn like it was some kind of overflow lot. I set my cup down on the railing, took a deep breath, and headed down the steps. I already knew who was behind this: Wendy Lancaster. Head of the HOA, self-declared neighborhood queen, and a woman who believed rules only applied to everyone else. Tall, bleach blonde, always in a pastel cardigan no matter the weather. If entitlement had a mascot, it was her. She was standing across the street on her front lawn, waving at her guests like she was hosting a royal ball. I walked over, keeping my voice steady. "Wendy," I said. "Your guests parked on my lawn." She turned to me with that tight, fake smile she always wore when she was about to say something ridiculous. "Oh, Oliver, it's just for a few hours," she said dismissively. "We've got my niece's baby shower and street parking is so limited." "I'm sure you don't mind, it's just grass." "It's my grass," I said. "Move them now." She laughed like I'd just told her a joke. "Don't be so uptight. You've got plenty of space. Besides, I am the HOA president." "I think we can make a small exception." That's when I noticed the clipboard tucked under her arm, her badge of tyranny. She waved it around like it gave her special powers. Wendy didn't ask for things. She told. I stared at her. "You're not above the law, Wendy." She leaned in with that condescending tone I'd heard too many times. "Oliver, if you want to stay in the HOA's good graces, I'd reconsider your attitude. I've seen your mailbox technically. It's 2 inches too tall. And your trash cans were out past 7 last week. Let's not make this difficult." I turned back toward my house without another word. She could threaten all she wanted. I had a plan, and it involved a truckload of manure. The next morning, I made a few calls. By noon, a local farm delivered exactly what I asked for: 2 tons of fresh, steaming cow manure. I paid extra to have it spread evenly across the entire front yard. The smell hit like a punch to the face. Even the guy dumping it gagged. I stood there watching the last of it pour out, arms crossed. "Got a big garden project or something?" the guy asked, wiping his nose. "Something like that," I said. "Consider it pest control." By the time Wendy's party rolled around again that evening, yes, she had another one planned. My yard looked like a recently fertilized pasture, and it reeked. Not just a little. It was the kind of stench that made your eyes water from across the street. Sure enough, one of her guests tried pulling up until they saw the mess covering the lawn. They paused, then backed right out. Another car pulled up, cracked the window, and immediately drove away. Wendy came storming over, heels sinking into the sidewalk. "What the hell did you do to your yard, Oliver?" I didn't even flinch. "Fertilized it. You said it was just grass." "This is harassment. I'll report you to the HOA." "Great. Take it up with the president," I said. "Oh, wait, that's you?" She stood there, fists clenched, breathing through her nose like a cartoon villain. Then she turned around and stormed off, muttering something about calling a special meeting. Let her. I had cameras up, a time-stamped receipt, and a yard that was now completely off-limits to her little parking invasion. But I had no idea how far she was about to take things next. By Monday morning, the smell had faded just enough for me to open a window without gagging. I was halfway through a cup of tea when I noticed a man in a navy windbreaker pacing across my lawn, holding a measuring wheel. He was accompanied by a second guy holding a clipboard and a camera. I stepped outside and leaned on the porch railing. "Can I help you?" The man with the wheel looked up. "You Oliver Pike?" "That's me." "I'm Aaron Feldman. I'm with the county zoning office. We received a report that you've altered the landscaping in a way that might violate stormwater runoff regulations." I blinked. "Stormwater, because I put manure on my grass." The other guy, younger, looked uncomfortable. "The complaint said the yard was regraded to create a drainage hazard. That was ridiculous. I hadn't touched the slope. All I did was fertilize." "Let me guess," I said. "The report came from a woman named Wendy." Aaron gave me a tight nod. We can't confirm who filed it, but it was submitted by someone within your HOA. Of course it was. They poked around for another 15 minutes, took some photos, then left with assurances they'd file a report. I wasn't worried. My security footage showed every step of the delivery. No earth-moving, no grading, no violations. But that wasn't the end of it. 2 days later, I got a letter in the mail with the HOA's letterhead. Not certified, just slipped into the box like junk mail. It accused me of creating a biohazard and demanded I remove all organic waste within 72 hours or face a fine of $500 per day. I snorted and tossed it on the counter. It wasn't signed by the board, just Wendy. That evening, I walked over to the community center where the HOA board held their monthly meetings. It was early, but I recognized a few board members arriving, including Harold Tran and Deanne Schultz, both retired and, unlike Wendy, generally reasonable people. I waited until they were inside, then walked in after them. Wendy was already there, shuffling papers like she was preparing for battle. She saw me and immediately narrowed her eyes. "This is a closed session," she said without looking up. "I live here," I said, "and this involves me." Harold looked up from his folder. "What's the issue?" I pulled out a printed still from my security footage, one that showed Wendy waving a guest toward my lawn. I've got recordings of her encouraging people to park on my property without permission. And now she's filing fake zoning complaints out of spite. Deanne adjusted her glasses. "Wendy, did you file a report with the county?" Wendy gave a little shrug. "As a concerned resident, I have the right. His actions affected the neighborhood." "His actions?" I said, stepping forward. "You mean defending my property after you let a dozen people treat it like a tailgate lot?" she scoffed. "You're being dramatic. It's just grass and cow droppings. You've turned the entire block into a health hazard." I laid 3 sheets of paper on the table, certified results from a soil test I'd paid for that morning. No contamination, no runoff hazard, just nitrogen-rich fertilizer. Harold skimmed the top page. "These are from Greene County Labs." "Yep, independent and licensed." Deanne pointed at the HOA fine notice. "Wendy, this wasn't approved by the board. You can't issue fines unilaterally." Wendy's jaw tightened. "Well, someone had to take action. He's retaliating publicly, and it reflects badly on all of us." "Retaliating?" I echoed. "You trespassed." "I used my own land as I saw fit, and now you're trying to muscle me with phony violations." She turned to Harold, clearly trying to change tactics. "He's always been difficult. He refused to cooperate with our community guidelines." Harold folded his arms. "That doesn't excuse you submitting fake reports to the county." Wendy's voice dropped. "I never said they were fake." I pulled out the last piece of evidence, a copy of the complaint she submitted to zoning. I'd gotten it through a public records request. She'd used her HOA email, signed her name, and even attached a photo that was clearly taken from her upstairs window. Harold read it, then looked up at her. "You said he regraded the lawn. That's a serious accusation." She hesitated. "I assumed he had. It looked different." "You assumed." "You made a legal complaint based on a guess." At this point, Deanne took out her phone and started texting. Wendy noticed. "What are you doing?" "Calling a special board vote," Deanne said calmly. "This is abuse of authority and it needs to be addressed." Wendy went pale. She started gathering her papers. "This is a witch hunt. You're siding with someone who brought manure into our neighborhood." I leaned in just enough for only her to hear. "You started this. I just made sure the smell matched the behavior." By the end of the week, I got a letter, official this time and certified. It stated that the board had convened and voted to suspend Wendy's authority pending a formal investigation. Harold even called me personally to apologize for the unfortunate escalation. But Wendy wasn't done. 4 days later, I came home from work to find my mailbox busted open, the door hanging by a thread. I checked the camera footage again. Sure enough, it was her car. She'd driven by at 2 in the morning and clipped it with her mirror. I filed a police report and provided the footage. The officer who came out recognized her name immediately. "She's on our radar," he said. You're not the first neighbor to complain. I went to the local magistrate the next morning and filed for a restraining order. It wasn't hard with the video evidence. A week later, a sheriff's deputy served her the papers in her driveway. She screamed at him for 10 minutes while the entire cul-de-sac watched from their windows. The fallout came fast. Once word got out about the restraining order, 3 other residents came forward with stories. One woman claimed Wendy had threatened to fine her over a non-compliant curtain color. Another said Wendy opened their gate without permission to measure their backyard shed. Turns out, she'd been running the HOA like a dictatorship for years, but no one had pushed back until now. The board finally had enough. They held a public vote to remove her entirely. It passed by a landslide. I didn't attend the meeting. I didn't need to. I was at home, sipping tea, windows open, the air finally clean again. My lawn, by the way, had never looked greener. A week after Wendy's ousting, things finally began settling into something that resembled peace. Without her constant interference, the neighborhood had the strange, unfamiliar hum of normalcy. No clipboard patrols, no surprise notices taped to doors. Just the sound of sprinklers and the occasional dog barking. But just when I thought the drama was buried with the manure, a storm came, not the kind with thunder, but the kind with subpoenas. It started when Harold knocked on my door early one morning, wearing a windbreaker and holding a folded manila envelope like it was radioactive. "Oliver," he said, without bothering with small talk, "I need you to see this. You're not the only one Wendy's been targeting." I stepped aside to let him in, and he laid the documents out across my kitchen table. At least 20 pages. They weren't HOA fines or empty threats. These were bank statements, emails, and scanned invoices. All of it tied to the HOA's Community Improvement Fund. "What am I looking at?" I asked. "Embezzlement," he said simply. "Over $38,000 missing, and guess whose name is all over the withdrawals?" I flipped through the pages. Wendy had listed fake vendors' shell companies with vague names like Sunset Solutions and Lawn Tech Partners, all of them billed for services that never happened. Pressure washing sidewalks, resurfacing a non-existent tennis court. One invoice claimed $12,000 was spent on community-wide rodent mitigation. "There's no tennis court," I said. "Exactly." Harold looked 10 years older than he had the last time I'd seen him. "We thought she was just overzealous, controlling. But she was running this place like her own private ATM. Have you gone to the police?" "Not yet. That's why I'm here. We need someone who's willing to take this further, and we know she's already retaliated against you." I ran a hand across my jaw. "You want me to help build the case?" He nodded. "You've got the footage, the order of protection, everything. And now that she's no longer president, the HOA board has voted to cooperate fully with authorities." I agreed. Not because I wanted revenge, I'd already had that, but because I couldn't let her get away with what she'd done to the entire neighborhood. Over the next 2 days, I worked with a detective named Tasha Morneau. She was sharp, methodical, and had the kind of look that made you answer questions faster than you meant to. She sat across from me at my kitchen table, scanning the digital files I'd transferred to a thumb drive. "You documented everything," she said without looking up. I knew she'd try to twist things. I wasn't about to give her that chance. She nodded approvingly. "Well, you're going to like this. One of the accounts where the HOA payments ended up, it's registered under a company owned by her nephew. The same nephew who threw the baby shower." I leaned back in my chair. "That explains the Lexus." Morneau smiled faintly. "We're compiling the evidence now. With your footage, the financials, and witness statements, we'll be ready to bring this to the county prosecutor by next week." That night, I sat on my porch watching the sun dip behind the trees. It should have felt like a victory, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Wendy wasn't done. People like her didn't go quietly, and I was right. 3 nights later, my doorbell rang just after midnight. I checked the camera feed, no one at the front. But then I heard a soft tapping at the side of the house. I stepped out with a flashlight and a phone in my pocket, ready to dial. I found a small envelope taped to the side window with a strip of duct tape. No name. Inside, a single sheet of paper typed in large, bold letters. "You think you've won. This isn't over." I handed it to Detective Morneau the next morning. She dusted it for prints and confirmed what I already suspected. "Her nephew's," she said. "Same guy who owns the shell company. We've got him on video dropping this off from a black Jeep." She didn't need to ask for permission. I already knew she was filing charges. By the end of the week, the county prosecutor had issued indictments for both Wendy and her nephew on multiple counts of fraud, criminal misappropriation of funds, and harassment. The sheriff's office executed a search warrant on Wendy's house, and the neighborhood watched in stunned silence as boxes of documents and electronics were hauled out. The moment her front door was sealed with a strip of red tape, a quiet wave of relief settled over our block. But one more surprise was still waiting. During the investigation, Morneau uncovered something none of us expected. Wendy had been quietly trying to rewrite the HOA bylaws. Not just to tighten control, but to grant herself the power to seize and auction properties if dues were over 3 months late. She must have been planning something bigger, Morneau said. There's no other reason to go that far. Harold called an emergency meeting of the remaining HOA board and invited every homeowner on the street. He stood in front of the crowd, holding up a copy of the proposal Wendy had tried to push through. "She wanted the power to take your homes," he said. "If we hadn't caught it in time, none of us would have been safe." The room erupted in furious murmurs, a few gasps, but mostly a collective recognition of how close we'd come to losing everything. Even the neighbors who'd once defended Wendy sat in stunned silence. We voted that night to dissolve the current HOA and re-establish it with new bylaws, new oversight, and for the first time community-wide approval on every policy. I didn't volunteer for the board. I had no interest in holding power. But I did write the amendment clause that required any future board to provide full transparency on financials and voting. As for Wendy, the last we heard, she'd taken a plea deal that included restitution and a lengthy probation. Her nephew faced trial separately, and given the stacks of evidence, things didn't look good for him. Her house went up for sale within a month. The listing stayed up for a long time. No one wanted to buy a home with that kind of history, but the rest of the neighborhood, it changed. Kids played in the street again. People waved without suspicion. And for the first time in years, nobody worried about whether their curtains were the right shade of beige. I replanted the grass on my front lawn in early spring. It came in thick, lush, and greener than I'd ever seen it. The irony wasn't lost on me. Sometimes, it turns out, manure really is the best fertilizer. The morning after the neighborhood vote to dissolve the old HOA, I walked out to find a handwritten note wedged under my windshield wiper. The paper was folded in half, the handwriting jagged and uneven. No threats this time, just a single sentence written in all caps. "You've ruined everything." There was no signature, but I didn't need one. The ink was streaked from rain, but the pressure of the pen had torn through in places. It was desperate, not strategic. That much was clear. I brought the note to Detective Morneau. She didn't say much, just photographed it, bagged the original, and added it to the case file. From the way her jaw set, I could tell she'd seen this kind of unraveling before. "You won't hear from her again," she said. "Not legally." And she was right for a while. 3 weeks passed without a single incident. The newly elected HOA board took shape under Harold's watchful eye, and Deanne was made treasurer after a unanimous vote. This time, the positions were volunteer only, no stipends, no discretionary accounts, and every receipt went into a shared Google Drive with read-only access for all residents. Wendy's house sat vacant. The for sale sign leaned slightly to the left, and the grass grew long enough to wave in the wind. No one mowed it. The realtor stopped placing fresh flyers in the box. People walked their dogs a little faster past her property, like even the sidewalk carried residual tension. Then early one Saturday morning, I got a knock at the door. Not a light knock. 3 sharp pounds followed by a voice I didn't recognize. Oliver Pike. I opened the door to find 2 men in plain clothes, one tall with a clipboard, the other stockier, holding a leather badge case. "We're with the state attorney's office," the shorter one said. "May we come in?" I stepped aside. They introduced themselves as investigators from the Financial Crimes Division. They weren't here about the fake invoices or the misuse of HOA funds. That part was already moving through the courts. They were here for something else. "Have you ever heard of a property annexation scheme?" the taller one asked. "Yes," I said cautiously, "but not around here," he nodded. "Well, you nearly became part of one. They laid it out for me." It turned out Wendy's attempts to rewrite the bylaws weren't just about controlling color palettes or issuing fines. A deeper audit of the HOA's internal files, unlocked only after the board turned over all digital records, revealed something far more insidious. She'd been preparing to use the HOA's authority to place liens on properties under the guise of emergency maintenance fees, not for actual repairs but fabricated ones. Roof inspections no one requested, tree trimming that never happened. Her plan was to push those fees until the homeowners couldn't or wouldn't pay, then initiate foreclosure proceedings. It was slow, subtle, and designed to look legitimate on paper. She was targeting specific homes, the investigator said. Mostly ones owned by older residents without immediate family or folks who'd recently lost a spouse. He flipped a page on his clipboard and pointed to a list of addresses. One of them was mine. "Wait," I said. "She tried to target me too. She had notes in her records about your property value, lot size, and resale potential. You were flagged as stubborn but manageable." I wasn't sure whether to laugh or punch something. The agents believed she never got far enough to execute the plan, my Manure stunt, and the subsequent fallout had disrupted her timeline. But the attempt alone, backed by financial records and emails, was enough to warrant federal interest. They were coordinating with HUD and the state attorney general. "What happens now?" I asked. "Criminal conspiracy to commit real estate fraud," the agent replied flatly. "Her plea deal's off the table." I watched them leave, their unmarked sedan pulling away from the curb. For a long time, I just stood in my doorway, staring at the empty house across the street. Later that afternoon, a moving truck arrived. 2 men stepped out, loaded a few boxes from her garage, mostly old bins and dusty furniture, and drove off without a word. No one came to claim anything else. The next day, a green sticker appeared on the front door. Code enforcement. The property had officially been seized as part of the ongoing investigation. The lawn was mowed by city workers later that week. By the end of the month, the house was listed as government-owned pending auction. But no one in the neighborhood wanted it. We petitioned the city to turn it into a public green space, a place for kids to play, for neighbors to gather, a place without fences or surveillance cameras. The petition passed after a council vote. They named it Lancaster Commons, not in honor of Wendy, but as a warning. A plaque at the edge of the lot read, "Let this space remind us that power without accountability becomes poison." One evening, Harold invited me to a backyard barbecue. Nothing fancy, just folding chairs, a couple of lawn games, and a cooler full of soda. As I walked through the gate, Deanne handed me a plate of potato salad and a paper cup of lemonade. "We're planting a tree next week," she said cheerfully. "You should come." "What kind?" "Red maple." "Something with deep roots." People laughed, passed around grilled corn, and kids chased each other barefoot across the grass. No one talked about bylaws or fines. No one brought up color-matching mailboxes or fence height restrictions. We just existed, together. Finally. I stayed until the sun dipped below the rooftops, casting long shadows across the commons. As I walked home, I passed my lawn, the same one that had once been buried under a mountain of manure, and saw something that made me pause. A single red tulip had bloomed near the edge of the property line. I hadn't planted it. Maybe it came in with the fertilizer, maybe the wind carried it, but it was there. Bright, defiant, and completely out of place, I left it.